At the Julian Way, we empower individuals with disabilities to thrive in faith communities by breaking barriers and fostering belonging. Your support helps us create accessible spaces where everyone feels valued and seen. Join us in making a difference today at www.thejulianway.org. Together, we can build communities of belonging.
Good morning, folks. This is your Palsy with Palsy's crew with a special Halloween announcement.
Yeah, hey everybody. So Justin and I are taking a week off here. We're just focusing on some other things, but we will be back to the podcast very soon. But in the meantime, we have
an episode from last Halloween about the depiction of disability as monstrous in early cinema and early artistic endeavors. So should be fairly spooky on several levels, and it's an episode I'm looking forward to revisiting. So we hope you enjoy a slight trip back in time about a year to an episode on monsters. Ooh,
yeah,
spooky.
spooky. Yeah, I remember having a very good time researching and recording this one. So yeah, hope you all enjoy listening to it. Happy Halloween, and we will be back in your feed with new episodes soon.
All right, guys. Bye.
Enjoy. Bye.
Hello, friends. I'm welcome to another episode of Palsies with Palsies. I almost jumped the gun there. I'm Justin Hancock. I'm your Palsy.
And I'm Becca Martin Anderson, your palsy. Hey, Justin.
How you doing, Becca?
Oh, I'm doing all right. We were just saying it's getting towards the end of our day, so I'm feeling a little loopy, a little silly, but that's okay. It's gonna be a spooky sort of loopy.
Yes. I was gonna say, for a peek behind the curtain, for those of you that don't know, we are trying to get on a more regular recording schedule, which sometimes includes doing 2 episodes per day, and this happens to be the main voyage of 2 episodes per day.
Yep.
But if we're gonna be loopy, Halloween feels like a decent episode to bring some loopy energy to. So I think it fits.
I'd agree with that. It is a season of spooky and weird things, and what is spookier and weirder than the insides of our own brains?
Yes, and as we will come to find out, the maybe transparently obvious, like leap to go there is, well, you're a disability podcast. Disability can sometimes be spooky and weird, but not necessarily until you factor in our own tired brains.
Yep.
But we just wanted to hop on for what will probably be a slightly shorter episode than usual. Having said that, I'm now prepared to go a whole hour and talk through some of the interesting ways that disability and social justice and queer issues more broadly kind of interact with Halloween.
Yeah, and the horror genre in particular too.
Yes, and full disclosure, I think it's safe to say, I know I told you this in planning for this show several days ago. I don't think Becca and I would ever consider ourselves native or fans of the horror genre.
No.
uh, but being a fan of cinema in general, I do have an appreciation, and I think as far as a lens on society goes, the horror genre, when done well, can do some really interesting things, but on the other end, can also do some like deeply irresponsible things.
Yeah, no, horror is really interesting because I think, we've talked before about our Western American society's trouble grappling with things that we're afraid of, right? And I think that horror can be a really interesting mode for doing that. That like when we frighten ourselves as entertainment, like, does that teach us something about dealing with fear? On the other hand, if we're frightening ourselves with things that kind of more deeply entrench our prejudices, is that just teaching us to be more afraid of things that are different than ourselves? Like, I think horror has a lot of potential to do some really exciting, disruptive things, and also has the potential to just underscore the oppressive systems that you and I would like to dismantle.
Absolutely. And I think we'll start right in. I think from a like disability studies point of view, the first thing first time I ran across this discussion as far as cinema goes was in a book called Narrative Prosthesis,
Mm-hmm.
which was the tropes of disability, the concept of disability, and all sorts of narrative fiction. But they talked about the mid 30s, a sort of now infamous classic horror film called Freaks,
Mm-hmm.
which was almost entirely based around deformity and disability being the locus of the horror of
Mm-hmm.
the movie and of its right potential. And of course, that was in the height of the eugenics era in the United States. So
Yeah.
those things would make sense. But
Mm-hmm.
I know in researching this show, if that was my entry point, you found some things out about disability and its depiction uh, going back even further around
Mm-hmm.
monster movies. Can you talk about that for us?
Yeah, so some of the sources that I was reading were analyzing the early silent movies of the 1930s, so probably around the same time as Freaks, um, and talking about the ways in which monsters were depicted at that time. Um, were like there were very clearly some resonances to disability, both in the sense of like bodily difference and bodies that society finds shocking and in the case of the monstrosities, frightening, but also this thing about these movies like Frankenstein, and Hunchback of Notre Dame and stuff like that, is the monsters are depicted as really innocent and really childlike, and it's kind of like a sense of they're monsters because society doesn't know how to treat them well, and they end up causing harm because people harm them or because they don't know better, and then people are blaming them for actions that they didn't know what to do about. And so it's this really interesting thing of like that is also often how disability is treated, is that, you know, disabled people are infantilized all the time and sometimes not held responsible for our actions, or we are, you know, or we are blamed for things in ways that you know, don't really line up with what actually happened. And so I just found that really interesting, that like, as much as like it's still a really harmful disability allegory, it's also a lot more sympathetic than you sometimes get with other kinds of depictions of disability as monstrosity.
Yeah. Um, that's so interesting. And I didn't bring this up in our pre recording conversation kind of debrief before we got on air, but yeah, one thing that draws my awareness to is the film of the early 2000 teens, Don't Breathe, uh, which is a horror movie about teens and young 20s who go in and rob a house only to discover that the owner of the house is a slightly less than stable, blind ex-military veteran who, and hijinks ensue uh,
Mm-hmm.
rather painfully for the thieves. And although that is not, again, and in 2015, 2000 teens are much different than the 1920s and 30s, of course. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but although that is not a great depiction of disability from somebody who's on the activist side of things as we are, I must admit, I do have a begrudging respect for that film because uh, it it empowers a disabled character to like
Yeah.
be the be the villain because he is pushed to be a monster and he is the one doling out the consequences. So I guess when in the right mood and
Mm-hmm.
having dealt with several financial institutions in the state of Texas today, maybe I'm in that mood. I do have, it's not great and it's not perfect, but it is interesting. It's a different twist than just the lazy, easy depiction of disability as like causing horror just because.
Yeah, no, it is kind of nice to have the framing of the narrative at least acknowledge that like horrific behavior comes out of somewhere, right? Even if
Yeah,
like there's still that underlying like, and it's horrifying because they're physically different. Like there's a recognition of the social dimension.
yeah.
And you know, I mean the other thing that is you know, kind of nice to recognize in some ways as a disabled person is, you know, when disabled people are the villains in a movie, they're powerful people, you know. And like, because as opposed to the other trope that we could have in a horror movie is helpless victims, you know.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, I was reading some Reddit conversations about this and seeing a lot of people being like, yeah, is it kind of a problem how many disabled horror villains there are? Yeah, but also, is it better than just having to watch characters like me die on screen without doing anything useful for the narrative? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's what occasionally makes me root for the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And it's
yeah.
interesting because like the one of the articles that I was reading was arguing that the slasher movies of like the 70s and 80s take a less sympathetic turn, that the instead of like literal non-human monsters, we get humans doing monstrous things, and we get more straight up depictions of disability, and also straight up depictions of queerness as well, because that's also true, is that queer people also get vilified in horror a lot, and in every other genre a lot. um but I think it is interesting that like even as there's less a sense of like this could have been fine if only people had treated this person right, like you're right, there's still a sense of, but this person was turned into this in some
Yeah.
way, that society really messed up, and that's why we are where we are.
It is interesting to me that the trope of whether it be neurodivergence, queerness, neuroqueerness, or any combination thereof,
Mm-hmm.
disability of any sort, is so present in this genre in particular, that when you get things, I was telling you that 1968 Night of the Living Dead uh,
Mm-hmm.
was one of the first movies, period, to feature a black leading actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard interviews with George Romero, who's been in the, I don't know if George Romero is still living, frankly, but he was making horror movies up until very, very, very recently, like within the last 2 years. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but he has been very open about featuring a black lead in a zombie movie where a lot of the zombies were rural and white, was a
Mm-hmm.
very conscious choice and a
Yeah.
very subversive move in 1968. So for a genre that's got some really that's deeply questionable, it's also got some moments that I think, because of what horror is, it can so easily play with norms of expectation for either good or ill, that it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, totally. No, I think horror has a lot of potential for some really subversive things, and again, that potential to kind of entrench harmful norms, and I think it depends both on the intentionality of the creators, but I also think a certain amount on the perspective of the viewers. We were talking before we started recording about queerness in horror, and the ways in which like depictions of vampires are pretty intentionally queer in a lot of ways. It's suspected that Bram Stoker was queer, and put a lot of that into Dracula, and the creator of the Nosferatu movie similarly was gay. Um, and so there's sort of a sense in which like sometimes creators themselves are depicting their own identities in the form of the monster, or putting themselves in the horror genre in some other way, to depict the horrors of internalized homophobia, you know
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
and I think that's one of those things that like is really interesting to think about, because that's an empowering move for a creator, and it can be really resonant to people who are experiencing that. Like I live in a reality so removed from the 1930s or the 1960s that I can't quite place myself in that position, but I can imagine like seeing myself in a vampire, and knowing that like there's someone who gets the pain of that internalized homophobia but has turned it into a form of power. Like that could be a really amazing thing to view as a queer viewer.
Yeah,
And at the same
absolutely.
time, straight people may be viewing that and going, ah, yes, evil queerness, good, gotcha.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's that line that gets walked, I think, more deliberately and more by choice by horror than horror and suspense, I will add, because I'm about to discuss um, something that walks that line beautifully. And FYI, if you're hearing things on my end, I'm not becoming a monster. By the way, I am sipping some half calf coffee. Um, so if you're picking up some slurps, nothing is happening to me.
Justin
Good thing.
Justin is not becoming Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Indeed, and we're gonna get there. Actually, to kind of maintain our chronological ish notion, you also brought forward some interesting things about that film, and then I'll jump in with some Silence of the Lambs ish material in a minute. But why don't you tell us about what you discovered around the creature from the Black Lagoon?
Yeah, so I started looking into it because it was referenced as one of these movies where the monster has kind of a more sympathetic depiction. I think one of the articles I read said that it looks like the Gillman, the creature, cares more for the female heroine that he's trying to kidnap than any of the human men who are with her do. Um, that was something interesting that I wanted to follow up on. But while I was researching that, I came across the original depiction of the creature from the Black Lagoon was a series of 3 movies. And the first 2 follow a pretty standard premise of, the Gillman is stalking a woman, and he fights a lot of people, and he kills a lot of people, and people are always trying to kill him. And at the end of the movie, it looks like he died, but oh no, he didn't. And the third movie, Gilman is found again, and a fight breaks out, and he gets burned really badly, and his gills and his scales get burned off. He was this fish human hybrid who'd been living in oceans and rivers, and he gets burnt, so he can no longer live underwater. And for reasons that I don't fully understand, because I was reading a plot summary and haven't seen this movie, the people who were fighting him decide that it's very critical to save his life. And in examining him, it turns out that he's been mutating and has started developing lungs. So they're able to perform a tracheotomy and allow him to breathe. And they then put clothes on him and try to integrate him into human society. This is literally a movie about normalization and rehabilitation, and
Wow.
it's a movie that, as far as I can tell from the plot summary, depicts how badly that works. It depicts the violence of how that is done. It then their first try at normalizing him is bringing him to a prison. They then, it sounds like, try to integrate him into society outside of a prison, and he ends up getting framed for a crime that, as so often happens to people who are marginalized, someone looks at that marginalization and goes, this looks like someone who can take the brunt of things that I don't want to take. And
Yeah,
he ends up getting chased back into the water and presumably drowns because he can no longer survive in the water. And I just looked at that and was like, I don't know if someone did this on purpose or not, but like, boy, that disability allegory hits hard.
Man, I don't know. Frankly, but I don't know how you're in the room. Well, after I would need to lie down after I read that as a disabled man. That's
Yeah.
shocking.
I can't decide if I really want to go watch this movie or if watching that movie would be a really bad idea.
Yes. Um, no, I concur, and again, but it kind of goes to this sliding doors stuff we've been talking about all along, whether it's queerness or disability and horror. I mean, if you tilt your head to the left and look at these films, they're tropey, schlocky, ham-fisted, disability-powered messages. And if you tilt
Mm-hmm.
your head to the right, there's some justice and some understanding and some depth there. So it really is like a hair's breadth one way
Mm-hmm.
or the other. And and I should say, I'm about to address one of the things that is problematic, but is still like unapologetically one of my favorite pieces of suspense and horror, I guess, fiction of
Mm-hmm.
all genres. And that kind of leads me to my broader point. Perhaps you should have said this in the beginning. My friends on the podcast maintenance phase say, this is not a Roner episode. Like, we're not trying to ruin horror for you if
No,
it's your
not at all.
bag. We do invite you to watch these movies with more awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you like horror, like what you like, just be aware. Um,
Totally.
but that having been said, I look at queerness, especially through the 1980s and 90s, and if you look at something like uh, the book Silence of the Lambs, and that
Mm-hmm.
series came out in the late 70s, and the movies came out in the early 90s, and
Mm-hmm.
the killer in that film, Buffalo Bill or James Gum, uh,
Mm-hmm.
is a a transvestite queer person or queer man, and I know that the transvestite and queer aren't necessarily the same thing, and there are gray areas, but
Mm-hmm.
the movie plays it very. This person is a transvestite. This
Mm-hmm.
person wants to be a woman. This person is taking out issues on young women. So
Mm-hmm.
really like deeply unfortunate like uses of stereotypes there,
Yeah.
and not good. As much as I love Hannibal Lecter and some of the elements of suspense and Anthony Hopkins, and it's not a great depiction of a villain, but it
Mm-hmm.
does become more nuanced when you see that in the book they lean a little bit more heavily into this, that this person applied for and sex reassignment surgery and was
Mm-hmm.
denied, and
Yeah.
this sort of pushed him into this place that they're in now. Again, not great, and I would never, even as much as I still enjoy aspects of these movies, now I watch the way the killer is depicted as someone living in 2024, and I go, yikes,
Yeah.
let's not do that again. Uh,
Yeah.
because they really lean heavily into the queer nature of this individual, and one of the victims is a boyfriend, and there's some. I mean, and again, you
Hmm.
would think even in 1991 that we would not be continuously like relying on a trope, but
Hmm.
it just really goes to show how much that trope became deeply ingrained in depictions of things that were off center or scary or what have you. So it really is. Uh, it's a well-made movie, but it's problematic as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's another great example of like, you know, potentially, and I can't speak for trans people on this, but like, you that I think that's a space where like one could potentially feel into the pain of that character, right? And like,
Yeah,
get a empathetic sense of for like just how painful it is to be gender nonconforming or to have your gender not match your sex assigned at birth in a society that is not willing to give you an inch on that is not willing to recognize you, to help you, to support you, and to see that pain turned into horror. And like I can see how that could be uh a helpful thing, in like in the same way that like the blind character in Don't Breathe like could be a sort of uh empowering and like like getting some sort of empathy through for your own experiences of ableism. But like, yeah, then when you present Silence of the Lambs to a heteronormative transphobic world, what they see is a trans character who's a really
yeah,
dangerous person. And that, yeah, it's just
yeah,
complicated, but in a like these things have real impact, right? Like we
yeah,
see all around us the rhetoric about trans people as dangerous, and we see how that's really hurting trans people, and so these things really matter.
absolutely they do. And it's just again, it's I wonder what those movies are like if they're made today. And there's an argument to be made
Mm-hmm.
that we're not any less queer averse or transphobic today. In fact, we've gotten really hella good at saying the quiet part out loud these days.
Mm-hmm.
So that it may not be different, but it isn't interesting as someone who has respected the suspense genre for a long time and been a fan of film, and I actually lean into the Hannibal TV show uh much more than I do the movies, because Will Graham, the detective on that show who meets Hannibal Lecter, is neurodivergent, and that's
Mm.
very much a part of his character and a very positive aspect of his
Mm.
character. But he starts experiencing I think it's cranial encephalopathy, where
Mm.
you're and like has a stroke, and neurodivergence is turned against him, and it really
Mm.
does but it knowingly plays with the science in a way that's not judgmental. So
Hmm.
even in the same, we've got three different depictions of that literature, book, movie, and TV show, and they all handle neurodivergence and divergence, even from the same story, in pretty radically different ways, which is again fascinating.
Yeah, no, I think it really is that like I think a lot of media does this, but as I understand, like I feel like horror goes through like will take the same story through multiple iterations, even a lot more than and suspense maybe too, even a lot more than some other genres. That like
Yeah,
you look at things like Frankenstein, right? How many different depictions have we seen of Frankenstein? Like so many.
yeah,
There's the book, there's so many original movies, there's so many remakes of movies, there's adaptations of all sorts of different kinds. Like I think maybe because of how easy it is to take a horror or suspense concept and just like optical illusion, you come to different conclusions about it depending on how you're looking at it. I feel
yeah,
like that kind of thing really inspires creators to be like, what if I turn this just a little bit this way? What if we
yeah.
bring out this aspect of it in a different way? And like, I mean, that as someone who really likes pop culture and media, that's fascinating.
Speaking of fascinating, and it didn't occur to me when we were talking about this off air. I think I'd like to end the discussion today by exploring the last film that we discussed as kind of and that's Get Out. And it
Yes.
occurs to me that Get Out kind of is the apotheosis or the collision between disability and race and horror. Um, Also made by a black filmmaker who got his start in comedy and is very, 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 very consciously a black filmmaker in
Hmm.
in Keegan Michael Key. So just a little whole lot of whole lot going on there, and maybe a whole lot of therapy bills that are uh, that are lurking in that film.
Yeah, no, I mean, so Get Out, we started thinking about it because you and I were talking about like noting all of the harmful tropes in horror movies. We thought about going to a place of like, how would we change horror? What would we like to see for disabled and queer representation in horror? And we can still talk about that, but I feel like the discussion we had about how complex the representation already is meaty enough. But in that discussion, we were thinking about Get Out because, like, I remember that when that came out, that was just so groundbreaking because it made racism the horror element of the movie. That the horror is in white middle class people thinking that they're colorblind and actually being hypnotizing, murdering, terrifying people. um, and like I remember thinking like, wow, like that is just so amazing to instead of the queer person or the disabled person or the black person being the horrifying villain to have the the experience of racism be part of the horror. um was just really powerful and really meant a lot to the genre. Here's the thing. I never actually watched Get Out. As mentioned, not super of a horror movie fan myself, although it's on my list. I keep meaning to watch it. But because I knew we wanted to talk about it, I went and did a little research on it. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Get Out, But it turns out a pretty big plot point of it is this white family. What they're doing is they are kidnapping black people and basically stealing their bodies and letting rich white folks kind of upload their consciousnesses into these bodies so that the white person can live forever. And they say that they're not specifically kidnapping black folks. They don't care what the race of the person is. It's the body's capabilities, not what they look like, that matters. But it's also very clearly, we kidnap black people because people will pay less attention when they go missing.
Mm.
Now, the person, our main character, the person that he's being kidnapped in order to be a body replacement for, is a blind man. And the very explicit text of why this person wants a new body is, I want someone with good eyesight. I want to be able to see again. And I read that, I was just going like, wow, like this movie like did so many good things for the depiction of race in horror. And we are just right back to square one in terms of the depiction of disability.
Yeah, yeah, we are.
And I'm not trying to be too hard on Jordan Peele or anyone else who made this movie for that, because I mean, that was 2017, if you'll believe it. So we're already several years away from that now, and like, no one movie can be good at everything. We're all going to make mistakes. And I was just like, I find it so interesting that the enemy here is not just whiteness, not just wealth, but also disability.
Yeah,
And thinking about the ways in which I feel like race and disability are often like pitched against one another in society, that like there always seems, and the way that so many marginalized groups are, right, but like that there so often seems to be this conversation about like are we going to talk about racism, or are we going to talk about ableism? And like this assumption that a lot of white people in disability spaces seem to have, that black people are going to be more ableist, and the very true fact that the white disability rights movement was pretty racist. Like, I feel like there's a lot of both like sometimes actually playing out in real life, but also very manufactured conflict between
yeah,
racial justice and disability justice. And I really wonder what a movie like Get Out could be that had a disabled black protagonist. I really would like to think about a horror movie that explores the dimension of being caught in that collision of forces, because
yeah,
those are the people that really suffer when we depict race and disability as being in conflict with one another, is disabled people of color.
absolutely, 100%. Um, and I mean, this is a Halloween. When this episode is gonna drop on or around Halloween, so maybe
Mm-hmm.
ambivalence is a great place to leave. If we're gonna leave one show with a certain degree of ambivalence, or not ambivalence, but not having made clean decisions, perhaps the Halloween show makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Uncertainty and in betweenness, very spooky.
but I do wonder if there's a little bit of uh, the makers of uh, Get Out are so conscious of their blackness that it's a little bit of what Amani Barberin says about the conflict between the disability reality and the environmental reality. It's hard to care about the environment when you're tired and broke.
Yeah.
And I think there's some downward pressure that comes from being Black that can be, you know, we got to get one thing school. We got to get the thing that is staring us in the face in the mirror, more representation before we can worry about everything. That having been said, as you said, it is fascinating that I think there's a lot to be said that the unconscious exhaustion of conceiving of a story like that where race was at the center might have led them to go, this is such a heavy thing. Let's look for an easy villain. Oh, yeah, disability and the easy trope. I'm not saying anybody did
Mm-hmm.
that with a sense of awareness, but it is fascinating in a movie that's, as you said, doing so much that we can't help ourselves but come back
Mm-hmm.
to a trope.
Yeah, no, I mean but again, like in the kind of optical illusion of horror, I don't know that Jordan Peele or anyone would have did this on purpose, but I also do wonder if Get Out kind of invites us as white disabled people to look critically at whiteness and disability, and in what ways do white disabled people dismiss
Mm-hmm.
or use people of color, um, and like it's not a comfortable connection, and again, like I don't love how that trope comes across to non-disabled people, but I think it's one that gives us something to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place for us to leave off. And again, this isn't a ruiner episode. If you love horror, um, go and do your thing this Halloween
Mm-hmm.
and watch your monster movies and do what you do. But also, even things we love can be worthy of closer interrogation when
Yeah.
we learn new things. So that's all we're trying to do.
I would invite let's go write some fan fiction. I really want to write some gay gill man who survives rehabilitation and finds his way back to the ocean and lives happily ever after with a human merman. I don't care. Frankenstein's monster.
And as long as you're doing that, I'm going to lift up my favorite version of Frankenstein, which is
Uh-huh.
young Frankenstein. And I would do my version of putting on the Ritz from Young Frankenstein, but people need to sleep tonight and nobody deserves that. So enjoy it.
Maybe
Go.
for some bonus content later.
Yes. Go. That's the version of Frankenstein I will be watching over Halloween. Is that but
I love it.
but you want to
Well,
land this plane for us?
yeah, thank you, Justin, so much for having this conversation with me, and thank you, everyone, so much for listening. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, if you're having some really exciting thoughts about horror that this has brought up, we would really love it if you would go and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It would really help more people find our show, and we would just appreciate it so much. And while you're off on your computer thinking about us, if you have thoughts or questions that you want to share, responses to this episode, things you want to talk about with us in future, you can head on over to our Facebook page and send us a message. We would love to hear from you. I swear we will have an email address soon that is in the works, so you will be able to reach us by email before too much longer. longer. But in the meantime, yeah, Facebook or any other way that you can reach us, we would just so love to hear from you.
Hopefully, we'll have that email address by the time this show drops.
Yeah, it might be in the show notes. Feel free to check the show notes and see if there's an email address there.
Indeed.
And whatever else happens, you'll be able to find us wherever fine podcasts can be found: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all the good places. And go out and enjoy your Halloween, enjoy some horror, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.